Hello, this is Dana and welcome to the Orchid Hut. Thank you for taking some of your time today to watch this featured video for my Brassalalia yellow bird. It is a first-time bloomer for me. I purchased it last year and repotted it. And although I think this plant has bloomed before, during the late spring here in Southeast Texas, it is a first-time bloomer for me. Now let's talk a little bit about the background of this orchid. It's a cross between Brassalalia Richard Miller and Brassavola nodosa, which is a species orchid. Richard Miller, the Brassalalia Richard Miller, is a primary hybrid because it is a cross between two species orchids, the nodosa, again, and Cattleya milleri. So the yellow bird orchid is considered a back cross. And here's the name. I will put some pictures up on the screen so that you can see the orchids that are in the yellow bird's lineage. And the blooms on this orchid are very, very unique and interesting. They have the star shape of the nodosa, as well as the lip shape. And then the yellow bird has some very attractive dark red, maybe almost magenta colored freckles on the lip. And it is a color changer as far as the blooms go. The unopened blooms can almost be a purple color. And then as the buds begin to open, they lose the darker purple color, but they still retain some of the pink pigment. And then it's only as the blooms become more mature that they turn the solid yellow color. Now, the freckles on this orchid are actually a recessive gene from the nodosa, although you would never know that because it's a white blooming orchid. And I think, though, that possibly the pigment color may come from the species orchid that the Richard Miller was developed from. So very, very unique coloring on this orchid. Now, many will say that it has a fragrance at night, like the Lady of the Night nodosa orchid, but I haven't experienced that myself yet. Maybe I will have to take a trip out into the darkness at the Orchid Hut just to experience that. It does not have a scent during the day, at least as far as my nose can tell. Now, the species orchids that this was developed from range from New Mexico down into Central America and South America. They're a very hardy orchid. I have mine potted, but they can also be grown mounted. They do prefer to be a little bit more on the dry side, I think. So I do let this pot completely dry out, but when I water it and saturate it completely. It's on the same fertilizing routine as the rest of my orchids. I wouldn't consider it a high feeder or a low feeder, just somewhere kind of in the middle. This particular orchid has been in this pot since I repotted it last year. And let's take it out of the decorative container. And you know, we can see that there has been some good root development since it has been repotted. I see a lot of new roots down inside the pot. And over the winter, I did grow this one under the grow lights in the house because my winter temperatures are a little too unpredictable and cold sometimes. But now that the growing season is here, it's growing outside on the shelf at the Orchid Hut. It does get relatively bright light throughout the day. Probably some early morning and late afternoon direct sun, and then filtered very bright light the rest of the day as it comes through the canopy of the oak tree overhead. Okay, so if you enjoy growing this orchid as well, please leave me a comment And let me know how you grow this orchid and if it's blooming for you as well right now. And if you learned something new or just enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button will be coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And I'll have many more featured orchids coming up in the days and weeks ahead, as this is blooming season. Thanks so much for watching, and talk to you next time.